welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Jeff Gibbs. Born in Flint, Michigan, Gibbs has produced and co-produced some of the most important documentaries of the past 2 decades, to include Michael Moore in Trumpland, At the End of the World, Shut Up and Sing, Fahrenheit 9/11, and Bowling for Columbine. In 2019, reversing roles with Michael Moore, whose films he had previously produced, Gibbs directed Planet of the Humans. This film provoked much controversy, especially after Michael Moore released it on YouTube for free viewing on 21 April 2020, the eve of the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day. It was then that this film became a wider target of a censorship campaign, being condemned as inaccurate and misleading by climate scientists and activists, despite the fact that nobody was able to demonstrate actual inaccuracies within Gibbs' film, which many consider to be a full frontal assault on the sacred cows of the environmental movement. I welcome Jeff Gibbs to Savage Minds. Your film went after the sacred cows of the environmental movement, and you did something that I've always thought in the back of my head was a thing, in the sense of when I was living in Brooklyn in the early 90s, I lived above an Echo Green store that popped out of nowhere in 1991. And they started selling recycled toilet paper. And over the years, it became LED lights that were able to be recharged by this mini solar power on the back of your bike. And the store became quite a hit. Are we using more energy to build a wind turbine or a solar panel, then we will get use out of it. And your film goes right at that. You pissed off a lot of people, Jeff, in making the film.
That's right. And if you don't piss somebody off, you're probably not making the right movie or writing the right book if you're trying to make change. And that's one of the rules of making change. If you're really worried about upsetting people, it's probably not going to you're probably not going to succeed. So first of all, thank you for having me on, Julian. And I think we might have, in your neck of the woods, there's also, I don't know if you ever heard of Rob Stewart, who made Shark Water. I drove to Ontario a couple times to help him button up his film. I was a big fan of that movie. I saw it in New York when I was living in New York. He showed it at a small festival there. And then Julia Barnes lives, I think, not too far from Hamilton. She worked on Bright Green Lies. She made a film called Bright Green Lies. And I just got off the phone with, in fact, I have to get my own podcast going with Paul Watson, who I don't, is Canadian. And then there's so there's a long tradition of environmental activism and awareness in Canada that people may or may not be aware of, but there's also a long tradition of environmental devastation in Canada and in Michigan. And, we're, for the people who don't know, we're neighbors. And, when we were kids, we used to, just take a drive to Canada to, get a few drinks or party or whatever. The film was only taken down from YouTube for a few days, and that was mostly where it was available at the time. But about many, now it's available in many different places on Amazon Prime, on Apple TV, on Google Play, Google Studio, and right now I only intended to have the free version up on YouTube for a few weeks, but we were getting millions of views. So I decided to leave it up longer. And then, just recently, I took it down for a little bit. I'm trying to decide which way to go next with it. But it's certainly, if you go to planetofthehumans.com, you can see where it's available. And we had it translated into a number of languages. And so it is out there. And we were a big threat to basically trillions of dollars in so-called green technology, and billions of dollars invested in the idea, billions and trillions in the idea that the problem before us is climate change only, and the solution is more technology, carbon-free technology, and then the world will be saved. And one of the things that is really important to me to be aware of with the movie is that, we're all right now, many people, most people are freaked out by what's been happening this summer with the weather and with the climate and the heat and you mentioned the extreme wind and the storms. That's a very interesting discussion to have because where was the announcement that we just set a record in the number of trees logged by humans, the number of acres of land turned to desert by humans? We just set a record for the number of sharks killed. Humans kill, the numbers are all over the place, but it's safe to say 100 million. I've heard 1 billion before. Sharks per year. Where's the news that we just set another record for the amount of fish depleted from the ocean? There have been more fish taken from, this is probably the least amount of fish that have been in the ocean for millions of years, maybe since the last asteroid strike. Where is that press release? Why is that not on the news? So the things that are freaking everybody out this year are the things that affect us, right? The things that we have a hard time coping with. So we glide along destroying nature on multiple fronts, of which climate change, according to almost every study, when you actually look into what is driving species to extinction, climate change is in the top 10. Is it in the top 5? I'm not sure, but most people would be shocked to hear that. We hear the story in Australia, the fires in 2020 that happened. I think it was going to be the big story before the pandemic. The fires and the horrible fires in Australia, killing 500 million mammals and marsupials and and wild creatures. Yet cats, an invasive species brought by humans, kill 1 billion wild animals every single year in Australia. In North America, birds running into buildings kill 300 million birds every year. 300 million. So anyways, part of the reason before, I'm glad to talk about the energy part of this and all that part, but it's important for me to understand that my driving force is that we humans are in the situation that's called overshoot, and that we are on the leading edge of the collapse of human civilization. I really think that that's true, but our attack and collapse of nature is very, very, very far along, and only now that the blowback is hitting us are we going, oh my God, this is so horrible. How can it be? It's like, so if there's a statistic you may have heard where 97% of mammals on the planet are now humans, farm animals, or pets. Only wild mammals on the planet, this is by biomass, by weight, are only 3%. So tracing all of the wild animals, I'm imagining that, I don't know if that includes the mastodons and the mammoths and those, but that's how much of the surface of the earth and the life on earth we've turned to human purpose. So, we go, oh, there's still a few orangutans. Oh, there's still some deer. Oh, there's still some wolves. Oh, look, beavers came back to part of Europe. Oh, look, some bears came back. But we are constantly rationalizing our destruction of nature. And so this is, so to me, the climate frame is a very human-centric frame. Because think about the rising oceans. In the U.S., let's say the coastline of Florida and New York is underwater, in New Jersey. That's bad for us, but it's if nature is going to create more habitat, it's a mixed bag for nature, but in the end, we're in the way of nature creating more habitat as the oceans rise, as the Great Lakes where I live rise or fall. Nature could adjust, except we're hell-bent on making sure that we don't have to change a single damn thing about our presence on this planet. So, which brings us to the green movement. That's why I wound up making a movie focused on this fake green movement, because in the end, it's a distraction from understanding that humans have limits and that we've exceeded them. And many of the things that you were discussing that I too ran into in New York and went to and was kind of excited about, but they're all just different ways of doing the human dance without having to really face that we've far exceeded planetary boundaries. So that's my sermon for this morning. And
you got a lot of pushback from some of the ideas about population in the film. People got really offended. And it's something that I noticed, that there are certain countries that go there and certain countries that don't on this planet. I'm thinking culturally, where there's a bit of a taboo around telling people that we need to start to talk about, dare I say, population, because people hear eugenics, they hear even genocide, and they make the jump, right? And or talking about family planning. These are things that when it's placed in terms of, let's say, the 1970s movement of feminism, that's okay. But when you talk about ecocide, genocide of the planet, of people who are slowly contributing to their future non-existence, then that's taboo. And it's rather weird to me that we can't talk about population.
I'm not that familiar with your show, but I think you are familiar with this territory. Just at a glance, is that in this bizarre way, the radical right and the radical left have become the same. And so, by the way, I never mentioned population without talking about consumption, because the two are intimately connected. For instance, what's the sustainable number of Elon Musk's? That would be 0. So, that single person's consumption and wealth can't be supported by this planet in the long run. But yeah, it's like upside down world when people are told that even to discuss family planning is racist or sexist, or where I'm coming from is a biocentric point of view. When you actually dive into why is the habitat disappearing in this country or that country, it's the expansion of consumption and the expansion of population. And when you actually look at any kind of research piece that discusses this, species after species, ecosystem after ecosystem, it's these two things working together. And so I think a lot of people on the left that consider themselves radical leftists in some form or other are completely unaware of their blind spot, in which they're merely rationalizing the very capitalist growth message that we've all been living in our entire lives, and spitting it back out in the form of, you can't talk about population, you can't talk about consumption. What do you mean? No, it's just the carbon. Well, it's climate change, it's carbon. What are you doing talking about there's too many people, there's too much consumption? It's like, well, I'm not talking about this. Just pick up a study that talks about the end of the rainforest, the end of habitat, the end of elephants, the end of lions. It's not the carbon that's wiping them out. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely.
But the carbon is affecting us now. It's affecting, the carbon is a boundary that says that a civilization with 8 billion humans is unsustainable. And so that's why we're hyper focused on carbon. You can graph the last elephants, you can graph the last fish, you can graph the last, polar bears. Polar bears were in decline because of hunting. That knocked their numbers way down. And there was some confusion because for a while, polar bears numbers were actually increasing despite climate change affecting their habitat. That's because finally the US and Canada banned polar bear hunting. So the numbers were going up for a bit. So it's not all bad news either. We find that when humans, whatever you think of the pandemic shutdown, nature did begin to recover. the skies got blue. Animals came out of hiding. During the days after 9/11, the skies got blue again when all the flights shut down. During the Great Recession, things began to rewild a bit. And so, it's funny, people refer to the pandemic. We actually need a plan to get ourselves under control that does take care of people and that we can agree on, because doing it through this happening through chaos is not going to be pretty. And look at all the social split that's still happening because of the COVID shutdown.
The COVID lockdowns ended up creating more division because the governments were able to successfully pit people against each other. And like you just noted, I wrote a piece about what happened here in Italy when lockdown happened. Venice is notoriously overcrowded, and that means overpolluted because the boats are carrying probably more tourists on summer days than definitely locals on most days from the spring through the fall. And suddenly animals returned to the canals. People, their absence helped the earth. But the fact that now we're in this very strange dilemma, even economically, because COVID also, the pandemic handling, I should say, shut down economies, people suffered, and class distinction was everywhere. But no one was actually allowed to discuss it because we were being, just like with the Green Revolution, being told how great it is. People were being told how, it reminded me of Terry Gilliam's Brazil, when people would, in that movie would say, we're all in it together. And there were billboards everywhere to get people to comply with these weird futuristic government mandates with these signs. We're all in it together. And ironically, a version of that populated public walkways and metros in the UK and public transport. And so this idea that we're all in it together to get people to lock down, to stay at home, while class divisions were what was actually the engine of this. The pajama class was very happy to sit on their couch and make money, while the working class did not. And you know this because, as not only having produced a lot of Michael Moore's films, where in fact, the look at the auto industry right there from where you come, these are working class bedrocks. The idea that if you tell people you can't go out of your house and earn a living, that somehow you're going to be harming other people by doing that. We're now, since the Twitter files have happened, we've been getting more information about what messaging we got and how much it was wrong. But at the same time, the world itself, we're seeing this, it's falling apart, and people don't seem willing to have discussions that are necessary for this. Can humans go on at this level of reproduction, basically? Because the statistics you just gave about how many animals are not on the planet is depressing. Right. It's depressing to think that you read about Australian, these toads that have taken over that weren't actually autochthonous to Australia. So we're seeing these invasive species. Read about the Everglades and all these people's pet boa constrictors that they got bored with, dumped into the Everglades. And now the Everglades is home to all these very distinct animals that come from various parts originally of South America and Africa. It's bizarre.
It's bizarre, and it's very multifaceted. And I want to come back to this cane toad and the invasive species thing, but I just want to mention that we probably have we may have widely varying views on the COVID lockdown, but the thing that's gotten lost is that people are being driven. People on the left need to understand, on the left, and people in America that want to see somebody, a Democrat elected. There's things that Biden have done. This Build Back Better thing with the trillions of dollars in green energy is, I've got some things I've written that I haven't published. This I see this as the final nail in the coffin, one of the final nails in the coffin of the planet, of our Mother Earth, and this hellacious expansion in the name of green energy. And this is a story that's I'll just throw out a couple things. I was with some people in the desert in Nevada and California who explained that one single solar array had been given an exemption to the Endangered Species Act to harass, however it's worded, something like harass, injure, or kill tens of thousands of wild species that live there. Could be desert fox, could be desert tortoise, could be mice, it could be, you know, whatever else lives there. I thought, when I met with them, I thought, this can't be true. This just sounds insane. So I went to the East Coast, and I've been talking with people about the offshore wind development off the eastern United States. It's going in off the coast of Massachusetts, which was ground zero for whaling on planet Earth and the whale wealth and whaling for energy. Down to New Jersey is where the big push is right now. The people there have totaled up the exemptions for these wind, quote unquote, farms, these industrial wind installations offshore. It's hundreds of thousands. I've heard the number 600 to 800,000, tallying up all of the incidental take, the exemptions to the Endangered Species Act for sea mammals alone, which includes whales, which includes hundreds of whales, including the highly endangered North Atlantic right whale. So I see what Biden's doing, and the Democrats who I've always, you know, if I vote Democrat or Green. But I would still vote for Biden as opposed to Trump or anybody like Trump. As horrible as you know, some of the things that Biden has done. But my friends on the left and the fellow Democrats and progressives don't realize that they're driving people to all kinds of crazy places by their unwillingness to broker any discussion. You know, if you don't say that solar and wind are going to save us, if you don't say just the right things about gender, if you don't say just the right things about the pandemic, you're kicked to the curb. I mean, you can't even make a living doing your like public speaking and that kind of thing. If you don't, you know, you're just, and that's kind of what they tried to do to us. They tried to make myself and then Ozzy Zenner, who you see in the film and who helped me produce it. They couldn't get through to Michael Moore, but they really tried to destroy us. And mean-spirited, they tried to destroy the movie. I knew it would be controversial, but I was shocked at the mean-spiritedness and the extent at which they were willing to go to shut us down. It's like, it was unbelievable, especially given the other things I knew had worked on, and especially since we were seeing the power of the film. We were seeing audiences that were just actually blown away. We learned that if we sent somebody a cut of the film to review, we might not hear from them for a few days because they were just like, had to get over the shock of it. So yeah, so that's, I think, the time we're in, where I want to have discussions with people with different views than me and learn something, and hopefully they'll learn something. Is that happening around the world too? Is the U.S. losing its mind more than everyone else? This division where you can't, if you don't go with, if you don't agree, then you're out.
Well, that's what I've been spending the last decade in journalism looking at effectively, because we see this everywhere. I am interviewing one of the many actors from the theater world in New York and Hollywood who were told that they can't work if they don't get the vaccine. And she pointed out to me that this was in contravention of ethics coming out of the Nuremberg trials, which is actually correct. And it's funny because I'm working on another subject that also interfaces with the Nuremberg trials, which is this medicalization of children because they identify as the opposite sex, but we're calling it gender, and let's just play with language. This has caused so much division in families, friendship groups, at work. People have lost jobs. And I've been writing about this for 10 years. It's crazy, Jeff, because you would think like 10 years ago, or let's just say 20 years ago, during the height of post 9/11 nonsense with W. Bush, who somehow has been re-venerated by the neoliberal left of CNN and MSNBC. Don't ask me about that. That's weird. If you asked me 20 years ago of saying that sex is immutable, that humans are sexually dimorphic, if that would ever be controversial, I would have said, of course not. That's just a truism. And no, things are falling apart. If you follow what's happened in the UK, I do believe it's very linked to the failure of what's happening in the economy. People can't get jobs. You've got Americans going to uni, coming out with 6 figures in debt, who are not able to get jobs that will pay that off. Someone was telling me the other day that there is now specialized publicity advertising aimed at seniors who still have to pay off their student loans.
Oh yeah, it's
Oh
crazy.
my gosh.
And we've largely bought into it for a future that our mental map of what's happening in the world and where the world is headed does not match reality. And every day that passes, it's getting further adrift from reality. So we've been told for a generation now, ever since An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2005, was it? That we can have our planet and eat it too. That's one of the problems with the whole green energy myth, is that we're the limits to growth. People have been, we're kicked to the curb. Occasionally you hear a little bit about it, but we've been told that we can have the same future, maybe even better, at least the same. No muss, no fuss. All we need is technology, and green technology will provide that. So as it becomes clear that that's not possible, for example, think of the refugee issues that you're experiencing around the Mediterranean and around the world, that we're experiencing in the U.S. If it's discussed at all in terms of why they're refugees, it's they're climate refugees. Okay. What about the fact that there are 1 billion people living in Africa where there were only a few hundred million, tens of millions at one point after Europeans arrived? How about the fact that there are 1 billion people in the Middle East that weren't there? The population was far smaller. How about the fact that our consumption of the China and then the US and Europe has devastated Africa, has devastated parts of the world, and that agriculture has helped expand desertification around the world. The environmental issues that people are experiencing are a combination of a human species with no off switch and an industrial civilization that's way overshot its boundaries, and it's going everywhere it can go, to deforest, to mine. Mining is a very significant part of the destruction of the Amazon rainforest, and then agriculture is way up there, and population growth. It's like, but we're not talking about the fact that there's a clash between our expanding human wants and desires and our desire to have no limits. People are told we can have it all. So when something happens and things ratchet down a bit, everybody gets confused and upset. Where I'm from in Flint, Michigan, we experienced the end of the world in a sense, in the collapse of the economy, and we weren't prepared for it. And it was a very rough and horrible and ugly thing to see where you grow up just literally destroyed. I mean, it's like an atomic bomb of sorts went off there, and the people were poisoned, and so there's a lot of talk about you have heard talk of the idea that there's the elites are planning some kind of a global conspiracy to depopulate or to do this or that. It's like, I don't know about that. All I know is we better collectively start talking about how we're going to get through this. There is going to be a reduction in our human presence on this planet. We can sit back and let it happen naturally. We're not going to like it at all. I don't know how we plan or get there together, but I know that we're not even asking the right questions. We're not thinking about what's the way to take care of people and the biology of the planet at the same time, in a way that's going to have a sustainable, survivable future. And but to me, that's a fun question.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show.
With invasive species, we should call them co-invasives, because we come in and, whether it's Australia, the U.S., wherever it is, and we change the landscape, and we alter things. We in the U.S., 99% of the tall grass prairie, the ancient prairie that used to support mammoths and mastodons, and then supported those enormous herds of buffalo, 99% are gone. There's less than one in Texas. It's less than 1/10 of 1% is left, and one of the number one threats is putting up solar panels. But then we bring in these species that don't belong, and between our disturbance of the environment and us bringing in these species, then they run rampant. It's much more difficult for an invasive species to get established in a native ecosystem. It can happen and does happen to disastrous effect, but it's hard to even determine that, because we've altered basically every ecosystem on Earth. So when I was talking about earlier, like, well, how can you say that climate change isn't again, climate change is going to be horrific and it's changing everything. But in terms of destroying the biology of the planet, we're way ahead of it. An invasive species is one of these unheralded things, co-invasive species that we bring with us, that just does an immense amount of damage, and we don't even hear much about it. But in a sense, if we come into a continent and run machinery and plows and chainsaws over the entire landscape, right now we're experiencing all these fires and all the smoke from Canada that's been drifting down all summer. But if you take a look at what's happening in Quebec or Ontario, the logging is just ferocious. There's just hellacious amounts of logging that have been going on and on and on. And yes, climate change, but yes, logging, especially clear cutting, dramatically changes the weather patterns, the heat, creates drought, begins to release the carbon from the soil, releases it from the trees if they're burning it for biomass. All you have to do is walk from the woods into a field, and to see the difference in temperature.
I remember when I was living in New York, the difference it would make just to even leave any street, even in the village where the buildings aren't tall, just to go into a small park like Tompkins Square, or Washington Square is very cement, but there are some angles there, or of course Central Park. And now they're finding that Manhattan might be sinking. They didn't think of this years ago.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it could be sinking. And again, for nature, how is that a problem? For us, it's a problem. So the environmental movement has become one where there's this religion of nature that's kind of in there somewhere, some care for nature, but it's really become it's all about us. Somebody just sent me an article that says this was in physics.org, a pretty reputable science site, that when only maybe 20% of the trees in a watershed are harvested, the floods increase, right? The wildfires increase. the things that we associate with climate change are part and parcel of ecosystem destruction. Is that am I making any sense with this thread here?
Yes, and people don't want to think about their relationship with, I guess, their input into this, right? Everyone, and this is something I have a bit of an issue with, where everyone wants to, yes, get mad at Exxon, get mad at all the tankers that have spilled in the ocean. But what do we do as individual consumers who buy from these companies? They're not bringing biscuits on those tankers. And what can be done in order to shift the discussion towards, again, population control seems to be something that we not only need to discuss urgently, but I think we need to stop stigmatizing it as a step towards Nazism. You know, the accusations.
How many women have been forcibly raped in the last century? Billions? It's more than millions, right? It's probably billions. Yet, somehow, how many women have been forced to have pregnancies because they don't have access to birth control or family planning? It's so somehow this, yes, nobody should be forced. There shouldn't be forced sterilization. There shouldn't be, I don't use the word population control at all, ever, for a reason, which I'll explain. But the flip side of this is being forced to have children, being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. In the U.S., it's happening even if you detect it right away. The pregnancy, your choice has been taken away. These things are affecting hundreds of millions to billions of women. And yet, all we hear is like, oh, you can't talk about population because, so. But what I'm interested in my future work is there are places where the population is declining naturally. Now, some of that's because in places where consumption is through the roof. Some of it's in places for other reasons. I think I'm more in favor of studying, where and how are people living in a way that their numbers are headed in the right direction? What are the factors that are involved here? What are the factors in which our consumption is, as Vandana Shiva said in the film, we don't measure happiness anymore by, anything that's human or biological. We measure it by, how many, people are, not to offend anyone. Well, I guess it might offend it, but it's like, we're all proud. It's, oh, look, I've got a daughter studying in Australia and I just flew off to this film festival in, France. And, oh, look, now I'm going to Palm Springs. And it's like, we're secretly proud of these lives in which we depend on vast quantities of fossil fuels to get us all over the planet. You mentioned something about tourism. I happen to live near a national park. There's eagles, there's shorebirds, there's turtles, there's all this wildlife. As soon as everybody comes, the summer hordes arrive, they all go into hiding. There's swans, ducks, and the river here, it's the only river in Michigan, on Lake Michigan, which is maybe 200 or 300 miles of shoreline. It's the only river in Michigan that flows into Lake Michigan that doesn't have, a dam or any development on it. And there are so many people canoeing down this river. It's like wall to wall. You're like bumping into people. It's like it's like some version of after an English soccer match or something. It's just, maybe not that bad, but it's wall to wall people going on this wilderness thing. And our national parks are now like that. It's like, wow, what happened with falling in love with your own backyard? We just, but this just is my world where we have to think of a different way of measuring happiness. And I don't know my neighbors. We're so separate from each other. We don't have front porches anymore where we can enjoy each other and visit with each other walking down the street. At least in America, we don't hardly have them at all. Everybody's inside. So Um, but I want to make sure if you had any questions you were going to ask me, or you said you've been waiting a while, or any ask anything, even if it's whatever. There's no question that that's off limits about, because you were trying to reach me when some of the greatest criticisms were happening.
Yes, I was really taken aback that you received so many. And then, given my work on the gender debate, I wasn't surprised, because you're not allowed to question how many meters for social distancing is good? Do the masks work? Do the vaccines work? Are men women? Is feminism destroying the planet? I mean, these are crazy things that I've seen in all my work over the years. And I think the debate or the discussion needs to happen. I was alarmed that it took the form it did. And in fact, I pulled out some articles that honestly, some of these writers, they might want to erase their journalistic presence at some point. There's one by Tom Athanasiou, who wrote Why Planet of the Humans is Crap. That's the title. Now, what's interesting about his piece, I'll quote it, is he tries to debunk your film, but doesn't really offer any debunking. This is the weird thing. And this is very typical in the gender debate. Well, that's because you're a TERF. Of course, if someone self-identifies as a woman, they're a woman. Well, no, actually, science matters. I mean, the Enlightenment was a thing. So he writes, once you get beyond the pro-solar rock concert bullshit, Gibbs' rap against renewables is embarrassingly wrong. Not all of it, but most of it. Moreover, it's fantastically dated. He seems not to even know that the net energy analysis of renewable energy systems is a thing, which is odd, because Richard Heimberg is an expert in this field, and Gibbs embeds him at the center of the narrative. I mean, seriously? So he's basically saying, Heimberg was one of the first talking heads in your film, if not the first, that you've bamboozled someone. It's just insane.
Right.
Heimberg has long been pessimistic about the potential for renewables to produce net energy on the scale we'll need. And here he says that we're getting, in some cases, no energy from these potential options, which is what Gibbs wanted, right? So I'm giving you one quote from this article. Respond to some of the criticisms. You don't have to just respond to this, obviously.
Sure.
As you know, there were many. I tried to read through them to find any kind of coherent gotcha on you, but I wasn't able to.
There's nothing specific in there. It's just saying, it's throwing out some generalities. And these are people, generally speaking, that work in the tech industry or are closely aligned in it or invested in it, or they have their own electric cars, or they're so most of these people were not just kind of what you would call just civilians out there without a dog in the fight, or whatever, however you want to say it. But they I didn't put energy return on energy invested in the movie, something I've known about for decades, because it takes some kind of willing ignorance, to even think of that as a valid concept. Yes, it's slightly useful, but the idea that you can compare energy that only arrives when the sun is shining. Right now it's cloudy, right? Clouds just rolled in. It's one of the hottest days of the summer. So the solar panel output, right now it's 4 o'clock too. So the output of solar panels, doesn't matter how efficient they are, drops drastically once you get away from that 10 to 2 period. And the wind did pick up, so I guess the windmills could be kicking in. So, but now we have two systems, because the sun isn't so effective today and it's one of the hottest days. Oh, I guess we're going to have wind. But I was just looking at some video from Texas of all the wind turbines taken during their heat wave, and the wind, at least when these videos were taken, and they were kind of random. Somebody was just looking at the blades that were being they were taking off blades that were only less than 30 years old and replacing them already, just like I say in the movie. So, but you can't compare a kilowatt of energy that you can turn on when you want it and turn off when you don't want it, with energy that only comes when it's wanted. And then, okay, we have storage, but as soon as you say, okay, we're going to have um, solar for when the sun's shining, and then wind for when the wind's blowing, but maybe the sun's not shining. But that still is not enough. So now we're going to have battery systems. If you study battery systems, it's pretty easy to pull up articles that say that's never going to work at the scale needed. So now we're going to have battery systems. Plus, we're going to have these giant, enormous pump storage, which are hydroelectric dams of a sort that are tremendously environmentally destructive. So just to put a point on it, the energy return on energy invested is a ridiculous argument because you have to have multiple systems, usually including nuclear or fossil fuel, to run both concurrently and then to kick on later in the day when the wind might drop off and the sun's not shining. You have to have 3, 4, 5 systems. All these require transmission lines and infrastructure, then the storage systems. So that's, they didn't bother to have the discussion and to ask me, why didn't you include that? Because it's a horrible, it's a distracting discussion to say that somebody worked out that you get paid back from the solar panels, the energy you put in after X amount of time. Well, you can't run a grid on solar panels without these other systems. You can run a grid on a nuclear power plant or a gas power plant. Not saying I'm in favor of those. I'm just saying that's the physics. You can run a grid on those alone without having multiple other sources of energy.
That's one of the theses of your film, was basically that scene where you are talking with Ozzie Zahner, who was at UC Berkeley, who asked the same questions, and he says that the most dangerous thing out there right now is that alternative energies are not really different from fossil fuels in the fact that people are not actually replacing fossil fuels with the other. It's just an addition. And then he goes into discussing how solar panels are not made from sand, and you show that very beautifully in your film. And you got a lot of heat from the Sierra Club. Can you tell our listeners about that? Because I just found this very interesting. These are what my friend Ken Watson used to call white flannel, sort of that very posh E.M. Forster type films where everyone's just posh and their daily struggle is to get to tea. And this is something that really struck me about the Sierra Club in general from when I saw them doing their PR back in the day, in the 90s especially. They had a lot of elite, well-to-do people, well-intentioned people flooding them with money. Because if you can make people feel guilty about something and get them to pay into the recuperation of that trouble, whatever that trouble might be, look at what UNICEF does with putting starving children's faces on calendars, which were you to do it here or in Flint, Michigan, you'd go to jail. It would be illegal because now there are laws about the reproduction of these images. But these businesses get a pass of doing things that would a lot of other people to do them, they would be in trouble. Could you talk about what happened with the Sierra Club?
Oh, I think you're talking about the investment criticism that we had. So if you've seen the movie, if you haven't, later in the film where I realized that the environmental movement and capitalism have basically merged. Not the grassroots environmentalism, which, by the way, there's been at least all over the U.S. People are fighting destruction of nature for not only pipelines and fossil fuels, but for solar arrays, wind turbines, mines. There's like several, there's dozens of these things in Michigan alone, between the mines, the solar, wind, battery factories that are clearing previously pristine areas. So, but at the end of the film, you see these investments, these long lists of investments that are bizarre, that are in these funds that Sierra Club directs you to, and then 350.org, Bill McKibben's group, and Bill McKibben directs you to. And I just couldn't believe it. They were mining. The Sierra Club fund you were directed to was the worst, mining and all this logging, fossil fuel companies, Gazprom, this Russian giant, this Russian national gas giant. So so how they tried to parse it was, oh, this oh, what's, I can't remember what the name of the fund was now, but this giant fund you were being directed to their website. Oh no, that's there's a special fund within this fund that the Sierra Club money would go into that doesn't involve these. It's like, and the reason this green hedge fund had this diversity is that they wanted to, if they knew if they put all their money into these supposed green things, that was not a, they wanted to diversify their portfolio. But the way McDonald's and all these companies got in there is like, I'm just making this up. And let's say McDonald's just decided to use paper wrapping instead of plastic for their Big Mac, or they decide to get carbon neutral eggs or something. So these giant companies got included in these investment portfolios by just doing one little stupid thing that qualified them as green. So they were pretty pissed off, and that's one of the reasons they had to really just kind of try and destroy the film and destroy. Again, they couldn't destroy Michael Moore, but destroy Ozzy and I's ability to get out there. Was that we really showed that they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They've gotten into bed with billionaires and bankers. And my question is, when you get in bed with these people, do they change or do you change? It's not them that's going to change. Who's outwitting each other? The billionaires that can afford to hire the top thinkers on the planet, and or Sierra Club, who's actually eager to get the money, because after all, you have to pay your salaries to live in San Francisco and in Marin County, right? And you're not going to raise that from hippies.
Is it ethical to get these pineapples from halfway around the planet over getting something nearby? Is it perhaps unethical, given the world we're living in, that we go and take a trip? You saw the complaining about ecological issues from the very people taking private jets, politicians, heads of NGOs.
This is the tension that we live in. And I did go to Palm Springs this spring, and I haven't been on a plane in 20 years, but I've been invited to Europe. I have to decide whether to come this fall. So, but the thing that we're not examining, is that we don't learn to have any off switch. So once I went from very rarely flying to working in the film business, it was like that: fly to Europe for this, fly to LA for this meeting, fly to Texas, fly, so it was like I had to live with a the laptop and a backpack, so it's it's going from America to Europe for my once in a lifetime trip, as opposed to going there for a meeting, right? Or the reverse. Having ships that will maybe take a few days to get across the ocean, but that aren't these big, extravagant cruise ships. That might slow us down. It's like, so I have friends that fly everywhere, and friends that don't fly. It's just, I'm glad to hear that there's an airport protest. I think it's the discussions that we need to have. There's no such protest in the U.S. And if you want to make somebody mad, it just suggests that we re-examine our flying. But there's our technology. It's just the way that we're thinking is it's got to change, and the way we're living is going to change. So the only question is, are we going to do this before the boom gets lowered on us, or are we going to just wait? And so that's really why I made the movie, to kind of destroy some of our illusions. And it's just so funny. Richard Heinberg, I love Richard Heinberg. He's a hero. He said some very wise things. But okay, why does Richard Heinberg occasionally say some things that sound pro-renewable? Well, he's got an organization, the Post Carbon Institute, that he has been part of for decades. And I don't know if he still is or not, but when you're trying to raise money, if you completely say in no case are renewables going to work and it's going down the wrong road, you're not going to raise any money. Who's going to fund that? You can go to the pro-nuclear people, but now you've kind of I'm advising people that are against renewables to not go down the pro-nuclear road, even if you believe in that, because again, it's just one more way of avoiding the fact that humans have limits. And you're not going to, what are we going to have, nuclear powered airplanes? I mean, it's with nuclear powered battleships. Well, I guess we have those nuclear powered chainsaws. I mean, it's still the same game. And that's, even if renewables did everything that they say, that is really the overall point of the movie. It's the same game, solar powered chainsaws, yippee, solar powered bulldozers, solar powered giant trawlers that have nets kilometers long that are dragging the last fish from the ocean. That's the issue, not whether they're powered by solar, nuclear, or fossil fuels. So, yeah, I'm excited to talk about all this. And I'm hoping that people will go to the website. And if people have any comments, to email me. And I'm just trying to figure out what to do next. So
You went from producing to directing. I imagine you were stepping your foot in a new terrain to a degree. Did you expect this kind of pushback, or had people warned you that this was going to happen?
well, some people say I better have a good security system. But oddly enough, that was about the criticism of biofuels and biomass, because what's funny is those are really the agriculture, which is biofuels, and logging or deforestation, which is biomass, are two of the most powerful forces in the planet. We tend to think of fossil fuels as the dangerous ones, but those, you want to talk about people being killed and murdered, and indigenous people being driven off their land, and that, those are the two big ones. A fossil fuel lobby is kind of a little toy soldiers compared to them. But no, I had my involvement as a producer was really in the creative part, and in the helping think through and make some scenes happen, and helping Michael put together the movie. So I've been involved in this stuff since I was a teenager, and a writer since I was a teenager. So that was, so it wasn't actually, I wanted to make a movie about the dying trees back in the 90s, and that just kept going and going and going to become Planet of the Humans. But I knew a little bit because around the early 2000s, no, where was this? 2009, 2010, actually. They were going to bring 4 biomass, 4 tree burning power plants to northern Michigan, right near the town where I lived. And I kind of stopped and slowed down, and I wrote the first article that I know of against biomass that was published in Huffington Post. Then they disconnected my account after 2 of those articles.
Wow.
Literally, they got rid of my account. And so some of the same things happened then. It's like somebody from Van Jones organization that was from here started commuting from San Francisco, partly for the purpose of working for the utility to promote this tree burning power plant. They hired 4 PR companies in the end. They brought in people from several universities. They brought in people from the state. They brought in people from Western Canada. So it took a couple years, but I went from just me to everybody in the community be against these biomass plants. And they had to withdraw the plans. And I don't think there's been one built in Michigan since. So, but I saw, yeah, they would call us names. The guy from Van Jones Group wrote an article calling us, we must be getting funding from the Koch brothers. Me, Michael Morris, one of his friends and producers, living on nothing in a rental house. It's like, you must be getting money from the Koch brothers, because we're not. In fact, what's funny is some of the local environmental groups quietly were funded by this oil and gas trust. So I'm like, it's not me getting So I went through this and I saw how the environmental groups stood on the sideline. I saw how they tried to take credit when we stopped these things. Sierra Club did send one person. It was unclear whether they were officially there, but yeah, it was. So, just in closing, I've seen that you can stop things. I've seen that change can happen. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe we were capable of changing. And I don't care what the odds are. I don't care if it's 50-50 or if it's 1 in a million. I think telling the right story and giving ourselves a chance to preserve a planet full of life that will preserve us that's the battle of our time. And it's fun to be in it and not just taking it.